More on that. I'm joined by Shwan Zulal, a Kurdish blogger and security analyst. Thank you for being with us on France 24 tonight. Now, first of all, as we just heard in that report, the Kurds had vowed to vigorously defend Kirkuk. Why then was there so little resistance last night?
Well, one of the reasons, the main reason what we saw last night is because of the Kurdish disunity. I think there's a quite big rift within the Kurdish parties within Kurdistan because of the referendum. Was when the referendum in June was announced, there was a lot of disagreement within different Kurdish groups. And if you go back 2 years before, the Kurdish parliament was shut down because of the rift about the constitution and the presidential terms and so on. So these been sort of brewing, all these resentments and disagreement over how to handle this has been growing ever since. And two nights before the referendum, we saw in Kirkuk there was a sort of an effort by various groups within the Kurdish party, especially the PUK, trying to stop the referendum because they knew from what they heard from the international allies like the US, France, and UK, as well as from Iraq and Iran and regional powers, that if the referendum goes ahead, Kirkuk will be a target of Iraqi government and they will support it. So what we saw, capitulation of the Kurdish forces, not because they couldn't defend. I mean, they had enough forces to stand and defend Kirkuk, but because of the disagreement among the Kurdish factions, this has led to what we saw last night and this morning. And yes.
Yeah. So what happens now? Because this disunity, as you call it, this division between the Kurds seems to be threatening the dream of an independent Kurdish state. And if the results of that referendum are to be believed, there was an overwhelming drive for the Kurds to have their own states in Iraq. What is happening? Is this going to tear those dreams apart?
I think the referendum from the start, although, I mean, every Kurds, I mean, there's always these caveats. I mean, every Kurds dreams of a Kurdish state. There's no doubt. I mean, you don't need a referendum to find out. If whoever been to Kurdistan or spoke to Kurdish people in Kurdish region, they know that every Kurd wants, almost every Kurd, I can say more than 95% want independent Kurdistan. But this referendum was a sort of political ploy by the current sort of government in Kurdistan region. I mean, if we look at the last 2 or 3 years, the government have failed to provide salaries, failed to reform, failed to unite the Peshmerga forces. Yes, there has been some unification of Peshmerga forces, but that hasn't really translated into institutions and strong sort of army and so on. So by sidelining various groups within the Kurdish political scene, this has, everyone was sort of expecting this to sort of blow out at some point, whether there was a referendum or not. So the Kurdish independence, for the moment, it will stay a dream. I don't think anyone expect that even if a Kurdish state was declared, will survive, because we can see the international community is not supporting the result of the referendum. They haven't haven't recognized it.
Is that why we're seeing this pullback now? Because there was so little support from the international community, and just a short while ago we heard Donald Trump saying that they're not taking sides in this. They won't take the side of either Baghdad or the Kurds. Are you disappointed with that?
I mean, every Kurd is disappointed. There were people calling their children Trump when Trump became president in Kurdistan, because they hope that President Trump will change his policy towards the Kurds and will be more supportive. But however, the Kurdish leadership has, again, to blame, because they didn't listen to the coalition, they didn't listen to the US offer to postpone the referendum because of the internal politics of Iraq. So in some ways, it's very disappointing to see that the US and the other allies who've been depending on Kurdish forces and Peshmerga to fight ISIS are turning their back away. But on the other hand, the Kurdish leadership has its part in this, and they're as much to blame for what happened last night. And let's not forget what happened last night. It didn't happen just because Iraqi government wanted it. This happened with agreement with the regional powers plus US and other coalition forces. They gave Baghdad almost a green light. They said they're not going to take sides. They're happy for Iraq to come back in those areas which they were in 2014. And under the pretext of the referendum, this gave the Iraqi government the perfect excuse to sort of drive back into those areas and push out the Peshmerga forces. Let's not forget, Kirkuk has been one of the safest cities since 2004 in Iraq. And this is largely because of the security forces of the Kurdish security forces, the Peshmergas. And any incident from now on, I think, is going to be difficult to maintain security. So, and if the Iraqi forces and the Shia militia try to, we heard reports of looting and so on in the city, it can really get out of control, and the ramification is going to be much greater in the region.
Shwan,